We will begin today's meeting with a presentation on the impact of Brexit for the tillage industry. While the beef industry will bear the biggest impact of Brexit, there are some issues concerning tillage farmers, particularly in the area of importing machinery, regulatory issues and seed supply for potato growers.
Thanks for joining us, Fiona. Can you see any positive or negative impact on the tillage farm incomes in the coming year related to the Brexit deal that has been done recently?
Okay, so Conor, thanks very much for having me here this afternoon. So the main headline that I'd say in terms of income effects related to Brexit on tillage farms is that overall the tillage income is likely to be less affected by Brexit than any of the other main sectors in Irish agriculture. And the main reason for that is that we're a net importer of cereals and not heavily dependent on the UK as a market for goods like the beef or the dairy sectors, for example. But if we want to get into specifics about forecasts for income related to Brexit on tillage farms, the last official income forecast for specialist tillage farms was conducted by myself and colleagues in Teagasc back in December. Now, that income forecast was based on the best information that we had at that time, which was based on a no-deal outcome, which we know now is not the case. But in that analysis, the majority of the Brexit-related impacts were associated with the subsidiary beef enterprise and many specialist tillage farms, because we know a lot of specialist tillage farms out there don't just produce cereals, but they have subsidiary enterprises. Now, at the moment, what we're doing is that we're updating those income forecasts for 2021 based on the trade agreement that was agreed between the UK and the EU on Christmas Eve. And overall, we expect that the forecast for tillage incomes will be more positive than what we had back in December, on foot of the fact that those tariff barriers won't be in place, which would have been in place in the no-deal outcome, Conor. So we expect to have those renewed, updated income estimates for tillage farms by the end of January.
What areas could you see maybe being affected? For example, in relation to fertiliser or agrochemicals, even pricing or even supply?
Yeah, so on those two main inputs that you're talking about, Conor, crop protection and fertiliser, you hit the nail on the head. There's two ways in which they could be affected by Brexit. One is the price effect and the other is the supply effect. But in terms of the price effect, the main effect in terms of tariff barriers to trade not being in play now because of the agreement that's in place. But what will be affecting inputs like fertiliser and crop protection are these non-tariff barriers to trade. And we'll have read about that in the media a lot, often referred to as NTBs. Now, what we know about them is that we know that they will happen in a Brexit situation, but what we don't know about them is the magnitude of them or how big they will be for particular input items. But what we do know about them and what we can talk about is that they will occur. And the reason that they will occur is that we'll have costs associated with customs clearance of items coming in, costs associated with determining the rules of origin or where products are actually coming from or whether they're just transiting through the UK. There are also big costs associated with sanitary and phytosanitary issues and also technical barriers due to trade inspections. And that's bringing me on to that next point then, Conor, that we talked about earlier about the supply effects for fertiliser and crop protection. So over the last couple of days and last week or week and a half or so, we've seen in the media a lot of transport delays associated with checking of goods, not just for agri inputs, but for a lot of goods coming into the country from the UK, leading to supply chain issues and lengthening of supply chain and taking items longer to come into the country. Now, we've seen this already taking place so far in January, but we expect as the year goes on that these delays will reduce as firms get better handling of the new procedures that are in place. Now, I know, Conor, before we leave these agri inputs, I know that you wanted to talk mostly about the short-term effects for 2021, but we can't leave these agri input items without me talking a little bit more about the medium-term outlook for these inputs, for fertiliser, crop protection, or whatever those main inputs are on tillage farms. So even though that trade agreement is in place, and both sides have committed to not reducing the level of environmental or climate protection as part of that trading agreement, what the agreement doesn't require both sides, both the EU and the UK, to do, it doesn't require them to have harmonised standards or regulations. And it allows for divergence in regulations over time. And this is very important for agri-inputs in the tillage sector. And an example that I'll give you of that is that at the Oxford Farmers Conference in the UK recently, the DEFRA Minister, George Eustace, said that he was announcing a public consultation on the easing of the framework for gene editing, at least in England. And now that's a very, very big departure from the situation that we find ourselves in the EU. And further on, over the medium term, we might also see a situation where crop protection products are banned in the EU, but are permitted for use by tillage farmers in the UK if the authorities there decide to take a different interpretation of the scientific evidence that's out there.
Fiona, that's a great insight and overview onto the Brexit side of the house compared to the tillage industry. I know that Kieran Hickey in Enniscorthy is going to take a bit of a look at maybe important machinery and the machinery side of things and Brexit implications, and Martin McCullough is in Donegal and he's going to look at the Brexit implications on the tillage industry as well.
So Charlie, maybe if we could start with you about the potato end of things, or how do you think, what has the deal left? What has it left at the door of the potato growers in the country?
Well, I suppose Brexit, one of the, as the saying goes, it's another one doesn't blow somebody some good, and in the Brexit case, I suppose the seed potatoes is that. As it stands at the minute, there's no seed allowed in at all from Scotland. Scotland would have exported between 5,000 and 6,000 tons into Ireland. A lot of that stuff would have been brought in before Christmas, all right, so they're probably safe enough this year for a lot of it, although I would say there'll be a bit of scarcity there, with somebody maybe missing the boat and not getting stuff in. But I mean, going forward and for growing the stuff, I mean, there's an opportunity there for us to grow seed for ware growers. It's a good opportunity. Like we can grow the seed as well as anybody else, like as well as that a commitment between the ware grower and the seed grower. I think that's a big thing. You can't just pull the planter up into the field and then ring the seed guy looking for seed. There has to be a bit of commitment to say, I want this, in the springtime, come to us in this, or the seed grower in the springtime and say, I want X amount of seed. Will you grow me X amount of seed so that I can grow that for him? So I mean, if that commitment's there, there's no reason why it wouldn't work. We're better to have security ourselves and growing our own seed. The fact that Scotland's out now, the opportunity is there for us to grasp it now. The only other opportunities or the only other thing the ware grower can do is go to Europe to grow the seed. But that's not a high grade status, and there's a lot more diseases out there, and you could bring a lot more problems in. So like I say, there definitely should be a big push on for between the seed grower, the Irish seed grower and ware grower. Why wouldn't we grow it ourselves, really, at the end of the day?
Stephen, I might just go over to you now, and maybe just how you see things happen from the cereals point of view, or the cereal tillage industry and the cereal industry in specific, or whatever, going forward.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so I suppose with potatoes, the changes are abrupt. They're real. They're there. They're in your face. Whereas on the cereal end of things, they might be a little bit more subtle. And in fact, many elements of it are as business as usual. If we take cereal seed imported from the UK or from Britain, to be more exact, there's not that much imported anyway. But essentially, all it has to do is get a phytosanitary certificate and get signed off by the relevant authorities and have a few documents and it can still cross the border and into Europe. When I say some things are business as usual, important grains for feed purposes, important silage, and perhaps the biggest missed opportunity of it all is important straw is business as usual. No requirements or extra requirements are needed, which is a particular disappointment because even if there had been a phytosanitary requirement in place for straw, it might have sharpened the importers' awareness of importing potentially harmful seeds like blackgrass or whatever. Well, yeah, I think when we get into the more subtle changes when it comes to the Brexit and on the cereal end of things, there's a lot of the technical details maybe around rules of origin for products exported from Britain, and flour is a prime example of that. You know, I believe there's a lot of issues come to light now with Canadian wheat being imported into Britain, then processed and flour exported to Europe and carrying a tariff. So you would have to ask if these rules, which are now imposed in Britain by them leaving the European Union, if that increases the cost of their exports, well, is there an opportunity for us here in Ireland to produce whatever they're exporting natively, you know, and undoubtedly there is, particularly in wheat. So, and then elsewhere, I suppose another change, a huge loss really to Ireland in particular, is the loss of an ally, in Europe, particularly when it comes to pesticides and pesticide registration, and that's going to be, it's going to take some time to manifest itself really, but whenever it does, we will miss them, and we will notice their influence and their support, particularly in the tillage end of things. Martin.
We're here today in the yard of Paddy Lacey Tractors in the Harrow and Ferns, who would be a well-known tractor importer in the area. And I suppose we just came here today to find out what the impact of Brexit would be on a business like this into the future. There are tractors here from Germany, from France, from Holland, but as you'll hear Brian say later in the interview, over 60% of the tractors that are imported here come from the UK market. At the moment, they have some machines purchased and are just going through the early stages of figuring out the extra regulations and inspections that will be required to bring machines in. But they are confident that the UK will still remain an important part of where they purchase equipment, and that they'll continue to trade with them in the future. So I suppose the question is, where are we now in relation to imports of farm machinery from the UK? So since last September, there's been a regulation brought into place by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, which covers the categories of farm machinery. So you have agricultural tractors, agricultural machinery, horticultural machinery, forestry machinery, anything for soil preparation or cultivation. Harvesting equipment, thrashing equipment for straw, fodder, balers, grass, hay mowers. So the Department of Agriculture will be administering the new regulation, but it is a whole new area that wasn't there before. The specific requirements for importing second-hand machinery from the UK are: you must register with the Department of Agriculture, you must register with Traces NT, which is the European control system. The machinery must be clean of soil or plant debris. A phytosanitary cert is required, which will be provided by the UK's National Plant Protection Organisation. All documents have to be submitted to the department at least 24 hours before the consignment is sent for shipping. And part one of the Traces NT form, which is the EU form, must be completed. And second-hand machinery will be subject to a physical check on arrival into Ireland.
Just before Christmas we bought tractors and the lorry going to England, and we brought them home on the same load. Or yeah, you could fly over and come straight home with one. Sure, there's no paperwork or nothing, just book your boat on the way home with you.
Have you brought any machines in since January? Or
no, we've stuff bought to come in, and we're in the process of getting it in. So we're just going down a lot of different avenues, talking to different people to see what the best way to do it is, but a lot of people are not sure themselves. Even the custom people are not sure themselves between English customs and Irish customs.
You still see the UK as being a big marketplace for you, and
I would say so. I would say we'll be still bringing stuff in. It's going to take time, it's going to take money, but It's not going to be just as straightforward as it was, but I believe by talking to some of the English dealers that we buy a lot of stock from, they've been looking into it. It's going to work. But if we buy a tractor today, now it could take, I don't know, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, we don't know. The problem will arise, the farmer, we're in the business and we don't know. Yes. And we know a lot of people that's travelling, hauliers, customs people, different shipping companies, we know, we're dealing with them all the time. We're not sure. So the normal man that wants to buy one machine, they'll have to go through, until it's on a website with A, B, C, D to do, it'll take time.
What's the current position on machinery imports? And is there much equipment brought in since the 1st of January?
The situation since the start of the year has been complicated, and I'm talking about new and used machinery. So, in some cases, new machinery that's being imported by the major brands, even that is not proving simple at the moment. On the used side, we probably saw a lot of stockpiling of equipment pre the new year, pre the Christmas break. And in fact, if you look at used tractor imports, which, by and large, the vast majority of them are coming from the UK. Last year, there was slightly over 3,000 new tractors brought in from imported into the country. The vast majority of those came in the second 6 months of the year. And in fact, December, there was nearly 400 tractors came in from the UK. Like, December is not a month that we'd normally see a lot of activity like that. So I think it's clear that a lot of people, whether they were dealers who are active in that second-hand import business, or indeed private individuals, farmers for their own purposes, decided to get ahead of the curve, get stock, get machines into the country before the great unknown. And so I think you're seeing limited enough activity because people had stockpiled. The stuff that is coming in is certainly not proving easy. And interestingly, it's not just here in the 26 countries. Bear in mind that north of the border, because of Northern Ireland Protocol, and there would be a lot of machinery flows from, we say, Great Britain into the north and ultimately down into the south from there. They're subject to exactly the same requirements as we are. And I've had dealers and importers in the north over the last week who are every bit as impacted by this.
The type of time frames, the type of costs, the type of challenges, you really, it's not like before. You're going to need someone that's pretty on the ball with this. Would that be fair?
Well, I think, as you said, Karen, for instance, this time of the year now, look, Tillage farmer, I suppose, relatively quiet. Tillage farmer, obviously, very knowledgeable about machinery, maybe in comparison to a lot of other farming clients, and certainly knows what he needs in specific machine. It has been so easy for that guy to do this transaction himself before. But really, we need to think that world has changed. And would the man would he have, as readily as going to the UK, would he have as readily looked to import a machine privately from Canada before? He wouldn't have, because Canada is the other side of the world. Well, the UK is where it always was, but in terms of regulation, it might as well be Canada right now. That's the truth of it.
Thanks to Fiona Thorne for the financial analysis and for highlighting some of the regulatory issues that have arisen as a result of Brexit. The view from Donegal, where we heard from Stephen Robb and Charlie Doherty, is that changes for tillage are more subtle, but Brexit may also present an opportunity for potato seed growers. The process of importing machinery will be slower, according to Brian Lacey, Kieran Hickey and Jerry Ryan from the FTMTA, as a result of the regulatory process and the increased paperwork requirement. And again, remember to submit your questions for the discussion forum at the end of the meeting. Our second presentation today covers the very important area of effective and efficient utilisation of organic manures. We have two excellent farmers from Cork who are making substantial savings on their fertiliser bill as a result of their efficient use of poultry manure and pig slurry. But firstly, Conor Kavanagh has some timely reminders on the nitrate regulations.
I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about the new measures that have come into effect under the nitrate regulation in 2021. The first one that affects all farmers is any farmers with farm roadways running alongside open drains or water courses will have to be cambered away from the water course to prevent any direct runoff or sediment entering the watercourse. This is with the aim of improving water quality in the country. Secondly, any tillage farmers with a livestock enterprise running alongside their tillage enterprise will have to monitor their grassland stocking rate. Any farmers with a grassland stocking rate of over 170 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare will have to fence off all watercourse on their holding 1.5 metres from the top of the bank, and also there can be no drinking points in watercourses along the stream or river. Secondly, any water tanks in fields alongside watercourse will have to be moved a minimum of 20 metres from the watercourse, with also the aim of improving water quality in the area. So I'd recommend talking to your local advisor and find out exactly what your grassland stocking rate is for the previous year, to know if these measures are going to affect you going forward. Finally, BPS, basic farm payment time, is fast approaching, so the same requirements, the greening, the 2 and the 3 crop rule, are still in place, along with the EFAs, or the ecological focus areas, staying at 5%. So ensure you have a plan going forward to make sure you comply with the 2 and the 3 crop rule and the EFAs. There is a protein payment in place for the coming year, which is €3 million divided out among the number of hectares sown in the country, which usually comes in between €200 and €250 per hectare. I'm now going to pass you over to my colleagues Michael McCarthy and Elaine Clifford, who are going to talk about organic manure's use on tillage farms.
So Craig, when did you start using organic manures on this farm, and I suppose why did you start using them?
Nearly probably 30 years ago.
Okay.
My dad started taking in farm manure from neighbours, and it kind of built up from there.
Right.
Kind of taking in different things, like years ago belly grass, and then the dairy gold sludge, and then moved on to pig slurry or even chicken manure in the last 10 years, say.
Okay. And why chicken manure in the last few years? Is there a particular reason, or is it just availability around?
Availability, and we find it very good on, say, for spring grain and that.
Yeah.
And that.
So is it just spring grain you're using it on, or is it winter and spring
winter and spring barley mainly.
Okay.
We use the pig slurry on the beans, and yeah.
So focusing on the poultry manure side of it then, what types are you importing, and how do you manage the logistics of it in terms of importing? Because you obviously don't have your own source, but do you store it and incorporation and everything?
Poultry manure we get is layers,
Okay.
and lucky enough the man we get it from has his own storage, so we can get it when we want, and we haul it ourselves.
Okay.
And we get a contractor to spread it.
Right. So you're kind of relying on availability of a contractor then in
Yes.
certain times of the year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for incorporation into soils then, you're spreading it, and what's your cultivation?
Spread it. We all plough-based system, so we try and plough it down as soon as he spreads it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just bringing it back to soil fertility then, I suppose, first of all, how often do you test your soil?
Every 3 years.
Okay.
I test it.
So you're regular enough.
Regularly, yeah.
And have you seen any changes in soil fertility, in particular with the poultry manure of the last maybe 10 years?
Yes, it brings all our P levels have come up a lot there, and they're a lot more 3 to 4.
Yeah.
So.
And how do you determine then what fields get the manure each year?
Depending on crop.
Okay.
Like if the index is high, we kind of give it a skip for a year, but if it's low, index 1 or 2, we put it on every year until it builds up.
Yeah, and have you seen benefits in the soil health as well as P's and K's?
Yes, notice it's a lot easier to plough.
Yeah.
And the earthworm numbers have really built up a lot.
Major benefit in that area. So
yes.
More production, I suppose. It's more alive.
Better drainage.
Yeah. And how do you, like you said, then that whatever fields you pick is depending on the index. So have you a method yourself of kind of going through that each year, or do you do a plan?
Yes, we do the nutrient management plan, and yes, it's picked depending on crop and when it got the organic manure last time.
Okay. Yeah. And would you think maybe of doing your soil samples more regularly on the ground that got poultry manure?
Yes, 3 is kind of good, but I'm thinking going to maybe every second year.
Okay, have a bit more of a regular pattern.
Yes.
And would you have any tips for someone, we'd say, that's relying a lot on compound fertiliser currently to grow crops? would you have any tips for them, maybe if they were going to increase their use of organic manures?
Yes, well, to be able to spread it evenly enough, especially on spring barley and that, and the poultry manure, because of the high nitrogen,
Okay.
like the maximum we put on is 3 tonne per acre.
Right. And would, I suppose, someone knowing how to spread it accurately is probably a benefit, is it?
Yes.
Would it?
Yeah. A rear, kind of the rear discharge spreaders are probably the best,
Okay.
with the discs on the back.
Yeah. So Craig, what do you find are the main benefits on your farm of using the likes of poultry manure?
We're using less chemical fertiliser, especially with the spring grain.
Okay.
You could grow, like with the 3 tonne per acre of chicken manure, you can actually just put on no P&K, bag P&K,
For
and
that
just
year.
grow it with can on its own and adjust your can rate for that.
Important. So you're seeing a saving in using the manure rather than buying compounds for that year?
Yes, a big saving there, yes.
Okay.
That's all. See, nearly 75% of our area gets some form of organic matter, so yeah.
You've no area that's relying solely on compounds then, really?
No.
Okay.
So Raymond, could you tell us a bit about the story so far and how you've gotten on the last couple of years using pig slurry and tillage crops?
Yeah, I suppose go back the years, we say, when we were using pig slurry first, we were using it maybe just to get rid of the slurry. But over time, we got to kind of realise the benefits that can be had from using slurry. And each year, we might do things slightly different. And we started to see where the results were coming from. And I suppose we're a good number of years at this now, but since the sugar beet finished back in 2005 or whatever year it was, we had to go into rotation, and we kind of, with the pig slurry, were able to stay out of rotation, so we are growing continuous spring barley, and we find we're getting very good results by using the pig slurry and growing in the continuous spring barley situation.
Okay, so could you maybe tell us, how do you plan the job now going forward? So say this year you're going to be growing spring barley. What's the plan as regards fertiliser and slurry for the spring barley for the year?
Yeah. Like we say now, we might see farmers around us here maybe starting out early ploughing in January or whatever, but we won't be ploughing in January. No, we mightn't be ploughing in February either, but maybe the end of February, early March, when it comes closer to the sowing, then we will start spreading the slurry. So we use the band spreader. We were using splat plates up to 2 years ago, and they were grand, but you'll just find when the crop comes up, you'll see the double where it overlaps. So you have no overlapping or even even spread. And we apply 3,000 gallons of tea slurry to the acre, roughly 3,000 gallons. Again, I keep saying to people that, with all these 25 and 30 acre fields, they were all 5 and 6 acre fields one time. So there's different parts of the field. You might put it a bit heavier or a bit lighter where the ground is better or whatever. But on average, you're working out about 3,000 gallons of pig slurry per acre. We found over the years we were able to keep reducing our fertiliser, and we're down now to using 2 bags of 15-320, and we incorporate that into the soil just before we sow the crop, from anytime from mid-March on. And we're continually cutting down the nitrogen, and with the past 2-3 years, we're down to about 1.5 bags of 26% AS in. So our total fertiliser for the spring barley, we do about 160 acres roughly all around us here, and the average is 2 bags of 15-320 per acre and 1.5 bags of 26% AS in, and that goes out as soon as the crop is just up.
That's a significant saving on a system that has no slurry going into it.
We find it a very big saving. Yeah.
And I suppose a question that's going to be in a lot of people's minds is that, people have had pig slurry experience in the past, and they've knocked crops and they've had lodging.
Yeah.
How do you find keeping crops standing as you move through the growing season?
You just have to be more careful. You have to know your ground, you have to know your slurry. If the slurry is coming from the fattening side or the weaner side of a pig unit, you have to be extra careful. You just, when the crops, if you sow the crop reasonably early, if you can sow it in March, you have a better chance of keeping the crop standing. The later you go into April, the more and more careful you have to be. You might have to use a growth regulator, but we have gotten away without using growth regulators, and to slurry spread evenly, and don't go over your 65 units of nitrogen. And if you think then the field needs a bit more, you can, but we have found the last 2 years we don't have to. Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of people will say that in wet seasons, you know, they don't have time to get the slurry out, or it's not possible to try and do the whole operation together. How do you manage? Like, how do you do the operation?
Yeah. Well, we have 3 slurry tanks, I suppose, that we can get our hands on at one time, and we would just organise a bit of help and get 3 tanks going, and you start ploughing away in straight away, and you're surprised, you know, you can cover 30 acres a day, and you can sow 30, 40 acres a day. You can make up the time quite easily.
And you plough directly after the
We
the
plough
tanks?
within 5-6 hours of spreading the slurry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question that's always asked, and Raymond, hopefully you'll be able to answer it. What would you consider as the cut-off point as regards taking organic manure a distance? You know, like, do you have far to travel from the piggery here to the fields, or what would you say is, you know, I can't go farther than that now because it's going to cost me too much to take it there?
Well, the furthest away we would have might be 20 miles, and we don't go there with slurry if we can avoid it, because we would have to hire a truck in to take the slurry there. But that's fair enough. If from a piggery point of view, you might have to, but from a tillage point of view, you know, it's probably not as feasible to be drawing it, you know, that distance. But for within 7-8 miles, we don't find it, you know, a serious problem. But as I say, the distance does come into it then, like you have to make up your mind in, you know. But again, it depends on your ground. If you have ground that you want to bring up with organic fertiliser, there's no better way to bring it up than to put on pig slurry. And if you put it on the same field every year for 3, 4, 5 years, you will then see your soil coming way up.
And your last soil tests were showing index 3 across the board. Like,
index 3 across the board. And so we are actually very conscious of trying to keep the P level down. Yeah? So we're only using, as I said, the 15320, which is 6 units of P is all we're using now, and all that spring barley ground. Yeah?
Thanks, Raymond.
Thanks very much to Raymond Maloney and Craig Hill for sharing their experiences on using pig slurry and poultry litter. And it's reassuring to see how good management of organic manures can result in excellent crop yields with lower chemical fertiliser use. Again, please submit your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Beans is the topic of our final presentation in today's seminar. Indigenous protein production is becoming increasingly important to Irish agriculture as we aim to reduce our reliance on imported protein for more homegrown, sustainable options. In this presentation, we will hear from bean grower Tom Short and Teagasc advisor Martin Burke in Wicklow on spring beans. But first, we will hear the story from the Northeast from Shane Kennedy on winter beans.
Beans are a popular break crop in the Northeast region. While the majority are spring planted, there are some growers who opt for winter planting. This crop of Wizard home save seed was planted on the 5th of November in North County Dublin. The field was ploughed, power harrowed, and then planted with a specific purpose drill to get the seed down to 6 inches depth. A residual herbicide mix was applied the day after planting. Standard one-pass drills will struggle to get the seed down to a sufficient depth to protect it from bird damage over the winter. For this reason, winter bean growers should consider using specific purpose drills to achieve the desired planting depth of 5 to 6 inches for winter planted beans. Additional bird control measures, such as bangers, will also have to be considered. This crop has achieved a desired plant population of 25 plants per metre squared from a sowing rate of 210 kilograms per hectare, or just over 13 stone to the acre in old money. Winter beans can tolerate a lower plant number than spring beans. This is because winter beans, due to their longer growing season, have a greater capacity for branching and tillering. One of the pitfalls of growing winter beans is brackling or lodging pre-harvest. Aiming for slightly lower plant numbers than spring planted beans will help to manage this risk. Also, given that beans have a zero requirement for nitrogen, be wary of planting winter beans where organic manures have recently been applied.
I'm here on Tom Short's farm, just outside Newtown and Kennedy in County Wicklow. Tom is going to share his experiences with us of how he's been growing spring beans on his farm over the last number of years. So Tom, could you tell me a little bit about just, how many years have you been growing beans, and, what kind of typical acreage would you have and why you grow them?
We're actually growing beans, Martin, for the last 20 odd years, maybe even 25, would have been started as a novel crop, with Teagasc and really to get a break crop. And I think that's, we have stayed with beans ever since. In fairness, we find them a very good break crop. We would work them 2 break crops, oilseed rape and beans. We would probably have anywhere between 100, 150 acres per year. And they've got on reasonably well. They are, when I say reasonably well, they don't like drought situations and they don't like wet summers either. They need what we would call almost perfect summers. So, they're not without their problems, but in the main, we get on well with them. We will also use some of them here for our own animals. We would roll them and use them as a protein source. So look, they have been good to us, and a simple crop to grow. In fairness, the number of passes with fertiliser or spraying is certainly well reduced compared to some other crops.
And Tom, could you tell me maybe what your kind of average 5 or 6 year yield might be on the farm?
I think our 5 year average at the minute is about 2.4, and it's which is deemed reasonably good. Having said that, we would have had some disasters, like we had 1.25 tons, 1.5 tons in certain years, certainly in very dry years. But then we would have had over 3 tons in a more ideal year. Last year being one of the very dry years, but still we would have beaten our 5 year average.
So what kind of seeding rates would you use, Tom?
Look, at seeding rate will always depend on the actual variety and the 1,000 grain weight. There was always a rule of thumb, 12 stone to the acre, but look, you must go by the 1,000 grain weight. I know last year we were up on 16 stone per acre. If you don't put enough in there, you end up with a tin crop. And a tin crop, then you get weed competition very, very quickly.
You're aiming then for about 30 well-established plants?
35 established plants, indeed.
What system of sowing would you usually use, or do you use different various methods?
We've tried, we would have started years ago with plough-based. We tried min-till, but in fairness, we've now reverted back to the plough-based system, simply because we find we can get in, if we can get a dry spell, one dry week from early February onwards, get it ploughed and get them sown, the ground will dry quicker. We just find it's too slow to dry with minimum tillage, so that's the preferred choice. And it seems to work. No matter what system you use, you must have good soil conditions. The last thing you want to do, no different to any crop, is to put it in when conditions are not ideal.
Financially then, Tom, how do you think beans compare with other crops you grow?
Oh yeah, look, in fairness, beans, they stack up, but you have to take them with the following crop as well. The bean on its own has a margin, but when you put the bean margin and the following wheat, you have a very, very good 2 year average then. So it is financially very good, but also the fact that EU are now topping up the support that we're able to grow Irish protein for Irish animals, I think is a great benefit as well. And that needs to be encouraged, because if we don't grow the protein here, somebody else has to grow and has to be imported. So no, it's a big plus.
Bean yields in 2020 were generally disappointing. In some situations, this was because of the drought in May and June, especially on the lighter and medium textured soils. However, a late development of chocolate spot, and in particular bean rust, caused significant yield loss in many parts of the country, especially along the east coast. The value of a late spray was borne out by many growers in East Wicklow and Wexford. So while it's hard to exactly quantify the yield loss on these farms, I did measure the difference to be about 1.6 tonnes per hectare, or between 0.6 and 0.7 of a tonne to the acre on my home farm, where 3 tram lines didn't receive a final late disease spray for bean rust. There was also a significant difference in the bean quality between the tram lines that received the final spray and didn't. Beans were very shriveled on the 2-spray programme. However, it's very hard to justify 3 sprays, as other years have shown no response to fungicide in spring beans. So going forward, we need to be mindful of the weather pattern before we apply any of our fungicide sprays to beans. So before early flower and before late flower, we should be looking at what the weather has been like in the lead up to those spray timings and what the anticipated forecast is after those timings. Another important factor is to have a look at the variety's susceptibility ratings for the particular diseases. Based on the current contract prices that are on offer at the moment of about €195 per tonne for the coming harvest, beans can be a profitable crop for growers in 2021. Roughly speaking, a 2 tonne per acre crop of spring beans should broadly leave a similar margin to a 3 tonne per acre crop of spring feed barley. So what are the key management tips you need to follow over the next few weeks and months if you decide to grow spring beans? Sowing date, sowing depth, seed size and seeding rate and seedbed conditions are all important interrelated factors to consider for a successful crop. Planting beans by mid-March will give growers a good chance of achieving top yields, but watch planting depth and crow damage. Sowing depth will be much more important with earlier sowings. So if you're planting in February or up to early March, try to get the beans down 7.5 centimetres to 10 centimetres deep. That's 3 to 4 inches. Sowing deep is not as critical once we get into late March sowings or into April. 5 centimetres or 2 inches should be sufficient then. Seeding rate is very important to get right. In general, aim to sow about 35 to 40 seeds per square metre in order to give you a plant establishment of about 30 to 35 well-established plants per square metre. Oak Park trials would suggest that higher seeding rates than this aren't of any benefit. The 1,000 grain weight, which is an indicator of the size of the seed, will be the biggest factor to consider when deciding on an appropriate seeding rate for beans. Beans with a 1,000 grain weight of 500 grams versus beans with a 1,000 grain weight of 700 grams could lead to seeding rate differences of up to 5 stone per acre if we were aiming to sow 35 seeds per metre squared at an establishment rate of 85%. One of the issues with having too few plants per metre squared is the fact that the bean pods themselves then can form too low down on the stem. And if that happens, you can certainly lose pods below the header height of the combine. Another disadvantage of too low a seeding rate is that the crop won't be competitive against weeds. A well-established plant count of 30 to 35 plants per metre squared is important to prevent the re-emergence of weeds later in the season. If you have too high a seeding rate, you can end up with a crop that's very tall and will be more prone to lodging and breakdown at harvest time, and that will inevitably lead to higher harvest losses. So take careful consideration when choosing your seeding rate. If using home-saved seed, get an appropriate seed test done. Certified seed will typically have ascochyta levels below 1% and will also be free from stem nematode. In terms of rotation, beans should not be grown any more than 1 year in 5. Because of the risk of sclerotinia, there should be a gap of at least 2 years between beans and oilseed rape. As regards sowing method, ploughing, min-till, strip-till and no-till can all be effective ways of getting beans well established. But a little patience is required in order to ensure the ground has dried out sufficiently in spring. So just like any crop, you need good soil conditions to get a good quality seedbed. If your soil phosphorus levels are at index 1 or low index 2, consider placing some phosphorus with the seed at sowing time.
Thanks very much, Martin. And thanks to Shane as well and Farmer Tom Short there for great insights into growing beans. And as we said at the start, beans are going to be a very, very important crop for us going forward. So before we get into the discussion forum, just to remind you again, just to submit your questions, and the panel here will try and answer them. And just to introduce our panel, we have Michael McCarthy, Tillage Advisor in Cork. We have Kieran Hickey, Tillage Advisor in Wexford. We've got Fiona Thorne, Teagasc economist, who you heard speaking on Brexit. Tom Short, who you've heard there on the beans video, is farming in Wicklow. And we've got Mark Plunkett, who's Teagasc soil and plant nutrition specialist. So, lads, to kick things off, Mark, I'm going to start with you. You're the only member of the panel that we haven't heard from so far. So, Mark, I suppose my first question to you really is in relation to the value or the nutrient value of pig and poultry manures that we've seen there in the video, and maybe a kind of a follow-on from that. How much of the crop requirement can organic manures substitute chemical fertilizer for?
Hi, Kieran. Yes, organic manures, that'll be pig slurry, poultry manures, farmyard manure. They are a valuable source of NP and K, Kieran. And in the video, we've seen there those pig slurry being used. If you take 1,000 gallons of pig slurry, it's equivalent to a bag of 19,720, and that's all available nutrient. And the work that we would have done, clearly shows that can effectively replace bag fertilizer. The same for poultry manures; they tend to be higher in their nutrient value. If you take the likes of, say, broiler manure or layer manure, take broiler manure there, it's something like an 11, 12, 24. So something like, a bag of 10, 10, 20 or a little bit stronger. And again, it can effectively supply, take Craig there and his situation in Cork there, he's supplying all his P and K through the layer manure. And he's grown very good quality crops, and he's just balancing up with nitrogen. If you take Raymond there with the pig slurry, again supplying the majority of the P and K with 3,000 gallons of pig slurry, and then balancing up with some 15, 3, 20 there in the seed bed. So there's a big opportunity, Kieran, to replace. Depending on where you are, like in the, I suppose, along the road in terms of using organic manures, we can effectively replace anywhere from, on the P and K front, anywhere from maybe 30 to 40% of the crop's P and K requirement to 100%, depending on the organic manure. On the nitrogen front, again, you can see there, we can replace up to maybe 40, 50, 60% of the crop's nitrogen requirement with the organic manure as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And just I might stay with you on this one. In relation to retaining that nitrogen, what are the key points that farmers should watch out for when using, whether it's pig or poultry or cattle slurry, in terms of, getting the most from the nitrogen in the slurry?
Well, I suppose firstly, Kieran, that is key, and from the work that myself and Martin Burke would have done, Patrick Forrest still on, say, poultry manure in Wicklow a number of years ago, and work on pig slurry, that is very, very important that the slurry is well agitated, it's evenly spread, and also speed of incorporation. That's very, very important for the likes of your pig slurry, that is rapidly incorporated. As Raymond said, they're incorporating within 3 to 6 hours. Also, what came from the work that we done in Martin there in Wicklow was, it's very important to know what's in the manure. So again, getting the manure tested, getting the poultry manure or the pig slurry tested to see what's in it in terms of NP and K, that puts you then in a great position. If I put out 2,000 gallons or 3,000 gallons, if I put out, say, 2 or 3 tons of, say, poultry manure, you can make the adjustment as well. And also, don't overuse. You know what I mean? If we overuse, you can run into problems in terms of lodging and managing that crop thereafter. So it's very much, testing the manure and then deciding on the application rate, and then picking a fertilizer to balance the P and the K, and to supply the remaining crop nitrogen requirement during the growing season.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Martin, I might bring you in on that one, because you obviously have good experience with those trials. Would you just make a comment on how you found in your own crops?
Yeah, well, we would have used layers, chicken layer or poultry layers when you were over the years, but the trials we had back in over 2 years, what we noticed was, if as Mark says, what's in the analysis of it, it'll be a direct replacement for your chemical. So one of the things I would say is it has to be nicely balanced. You know, so it's I suppose a balance of chemical and the organic manure as a complement to one another. But if you have them in the right balance, I would have even had a lot of queries at the time, you know, from malting barley growers at the time even, and used wisely, they can fit, you know, it can fit into any situation, and you can manage your proteins too. But it's just to know what's in the get the analysis done.
Know what where you're starting. And Tom, if I can bring you in there, Tom, I believe you're using poultry manure in your farm as well. Just your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're probably using poultry litter now for the last 7 or 8 years. And again, it's a two-edged approach. We want to reduce the use of chemical fertilizer, but also our soils, you know, between, you know, the life of the soil is much better. A lot more fibrous material in the soil, a lot more earthworms, and those earthworms are without doubt you know, huge advantage. If we go out with a spade now and just dig a square spade of soil, if we're very disappointed in that spade if we don't see 7 or 8 good earthworms, and I think that's what the organic matter has brought to us. You know, plus the fact that we're reducing our chemical bill.
Okay, which is a huge saving, obviously.
But I would, if I could, Kieran, just look at poultry litter. It would have to come with a health warning as well. You know, the layers manure is fine, but you take the chicken manure, we need to be very, very careful that, you know, that is coming from good sources and that it is ploughed in, incorporated as soon as possible, because look at with livestock very close to a lot of people's farms, we need to be very cognizant that botulism can be a problem. So just to be aware of that.
That's a great point, Tom, and thanks for reminding us on that, because obviously the ploughing it in rapidly, as Craig highlighted in his presentation as well, and maybe Michael McCarthy, just on that one, you know, your experience of maybe the logistics around how people manage organic manures, and as Tom said, ploughing it in rapidly and doing it well, and maybe also I suppose soil testing is probably and nutrient management planning is the starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, well, when it comes to logistics, you know, it's the same as any other job on a tillage farm, Kieran. It needs good planning and plan ahead and organise the day and stuff like that. As you could see from the videos there with Raymond and the lads down in West Cork, you know, they had a couple of tanks going, they had 2 ploughs going, so it was taking a lot of labour. And that's, I suppose, where a lot of people might, you know, fall in, that they'll say, look, I'm on my own, or there's only 2 of us and we can't get labour to do the job. But I suppose where labour could be an issue, you know, you could consider using a contractor, because the source of organic manures is very valuable, you know what I mean? And it will bring a good saving on the overall fertilizer bill. But its planning is key, you know. With regards to the soil testing is paramount, and nutrient management planning when you are using a lot of manures and bringing in an awful lot of organic manures. Because number one, you need to know your soil indexes, and you need to know what you need to follow on with the organic manures. You could see from what Raymond is saying, like they're using, you know, 15-320, and they're using a bag and a half of ASN after. Now, the reason they're using the 15-320 is they want a bit of available P in the seed bed with the crop, but also it's to boost the potash levels going in. Okay, because they feel they're not getting enough potash in the pig slurry, on the 3,000 gallons of pig slurry. You know, what isn't mentioned are the yields, and where you're taking off high yielding crops of spring barley and high yields of straw. You know, I'm talking, you know, 7.5 ton plus crops of spring barley to the hectare. You know, that is drawing an awful lot from the soil. So it's crucial to soil test, and you know, the more often you soil test, the better. So like as even we saw with Craig, moving to 2-year soil tests is very good, and doing the nutrient management plan in, because as you must know, when you import organic manures, you're subject to nitrate regulations, and like you need to find out the total farm allowance and what you're allowed to import, because you don't want yourself going astray in the eyes of regulations either. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, thanks, Michael. So the importance of soil test, following it up with a nutrient management plan, and having a balanced approach, matching your crop offtakes is key. So lads, I'm going to switch to the Brexit topic for a few minutes. Fiona, if I might start with you. I suppose really one of the things I got from your presentation was, and Stephen Robb said it as well, maybe the changes for tillage are more subtle. Maybe Fiona, just in terms of your financial analysis, firstly, I think basically you were saying the impact on tillage only farms would be minimal enough, but obviously beef is going to impact on a lot of tillage farms, and you found that through the National Farm Survey.
That's right, Kieran. So yeah, I think subtle differences, I think, is a good way of describing it overall in terms of the impact on tillage farms, or the potential impact that Brexit could have had if we didn't have that free trade agreement from before Christmas. So at the outset, when we started doing this economic modelling in Teagasc for potential impacts, the tillage sector was the one that was coming out with not as significant income effects as some of the other sectors. And you hit the nail on the head there, Kieran. The beef and the dairy sector in particular having more significant income potential effects from the fallout from Brexit. But sticking with the tillage sector and potential effects, we have to remember that just because it's a specialist tillage farm, and the way we define our specialist systems in the income analysis in Teagasc, those specialist systems have the majority of their output from the definition. So for a specialist tillage farm, most of the crop output is coming from cereals, but they also have subsidiary enterprises. And a specialist tillage farm, on average, will have about €20,000 coming from a beef enterprise. Now, and that's a significant amount of output, something similar to the basic payment that an average specialist tillage farm would have. So if those tariff barriers did apply, they would have had a very large impact on incomes on that subsidiary beef enterprise.
Okay.
But Kieran, just because the tariff barriers aren't there, it doesn't mean that those non-tariff barriers aren't going to be in place. And we have to remember that they will have a financial impact as well.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. And just to mention maybe the non-tariff barriers, Kieran Hickey, I suppose in your presentation, I suppose you really highlighted that I suppose we can still import machinery from the UK and that, but this process is going to be more cumbersome with a lot more regulations than we had before.
Yeah, I suppose I'll be honest, I didn't even know what a non-tariff barrier was before Christmas, and I started researching this, and I suppose we were so focused on the big barriers like the VAT and possible tariffs that, you know, when all the small things started to pop up, then when luckily enough the agreement was made, we hadn't really tested how actually all of this was going to happen in place. And I'd say that's what's happening at the minute. It's baby steps into how we're going to actually get all of this stuff into the country going forward. And there's no doubt it'll smoothen out, but at the moment it's big problems, and you really need to, it's all about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, because what was a very easy procedure before now has this kind of like, if one item doesn't work, or if the famous saying the computer says no, it's that shipment that's impounded or held up or delayed, and that's going to rack up costs. So it's a big difference, you know.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. So slower, more cumbersome process, and certainly a learning process, I suppose, initially anyway.
Yeah, Kieran, there's a question there about bringing stuff in from the north. Talking to Gary Ryan from the FTMTA, the north is affected equally as much as the south. They have the same regulation bringing in stuff from the UK. So they may have thought that, you know, stuff was going to fly into the north and make its way down here. That didn't happen.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. I suppose Gary made a great point at the end. He said you wouldn't have gone to Canada to buy a machine before, but maybe bringing in stuff now might be similar in terms of regulation and that. So that was a telling point. Just to move on to the beans, and as we said, beans are obviously going to be hugely important going forward. Tom, if I might start with you, and something that you mentioned which kind of resonated with me was, you know, we don't look at beans, you know, on a single year. You know, it's the benefit and the rotation and that. And I think it's a comment you made. You might just follow it up there with maybe what you're getting in terms of your succeeding crops and that after beans.
Yeah, I think in fairness, you know, as a standalone crop, and it always does depend on the cost, the value of your crop is really hinged on the price of soya bean. If soya is up, bean will be up, and vice versa. But what we have found year on year that you have to look at the following wheat crop, because you will get a very, very substantial increase in yield for no extra cost, given that there's quite a bit of residual nitrogen left in the ground. The winter wheat going in there, it takes off very, very well. So you really have to take that bonus in and be able to take the 2 years as an average, because look at the minute, the bean, if it wasn't for the protein payment, would be quite questionable in the average year. But when you factor in that approximately €100 an acre, 250 a hectare, plus the benefit of the wheat, it's a win-win then. But they're not a crop. They're not a crop that they're a simple crop to grow, but they can vary. They're very weather dependent. If you don't get them in early enough, a late crop of beans will never yield well. Too wet, too dry. So they're not as straightforward, say, as barley. But at the same time, the 5-year average plus the increase every year on wheat has to be accounted for.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. Martin, on your end there, I suppose, like last year, we had the highest area that we've had in a long, long time, 12,600 hectares of beans. And I'm sure there are many farmers on this morning contemplating sowing beans this spring. When, from your experience, would you see as the ideal time to plant spring beans, and maybe just in terms of sowing rate and soil conditions as well?
And sure, look, in an ideal world, if we got a lovely dry February, we'd all be in sowing beans, because look, historically, the yields from early sown beans that would be higher than later sown. So I suppose if you could get them in a good dry spell in February up to St. Patrick's Day is the ideal. What can happen, obviously, is the weather doesn't take up till after the second half of March. At that stage, you will still get a very good crop of beans, but I suppose once you get into April, then you're getting, quite late, and yield potential will dip, but you'll still achieve maybe a 2-ton crop. I suppose in terms of the risks, then in the ideal situation of sowing in February is the risk is bird damage, and so you're going to have to put your seed down deeper, so down to 3 or 4 inches. The other thing is, you want beans to get off to a good start, so try to avoid putting beans in where your soil phosphorus is very low, or if you do have to put it into a soil, a low phosphorus situation, place some phosphorus down with the seed. So
okay.
The other risk, I suppose, with the very late sown beans, or the later you sow as well in the spring, is, they will be more prone to the drought. They won't root as well. Like, for example, winter beans will root that bit better and won't be as prone to drought either.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And as you mentioned winter beans, I'm just looking at a question here. What's the cut-off time for sowing winter beans?
Yeah, well, look, I can remember us sowing beans on our home farm there around the first week of December, and no problem. Once you get them down deep enough, is there really a cut-off date? If the conditions are dry, and you can get them down deep and avoid crow damage, and the next few weeks of weather are relatively dry, you can get a very good crop of beans. I wouldn't like to say there's a cut-off date for winter beans. But I suppose, realistically, you're trying to get them in from sort of 20th of October to the 15th of November. That'd be, okay.
Bird damage is obviously a big factor as well.
I think Shane pointed that out well in the video there.
Fairness, yeah. And Tom, there's a kind of a direct question here to you. What's your kind of typical wheat yields after beans, or even if you could compare after other crops, maybe, or continuous wheat?
Well, yeah, look, at continuous wheat is not something that we've been practicing now for a good number of years. Look at our wheat last year, or the last 2-year average wheat is about 4.4 tons at 20%. If from after the beans, whereas we're closer to the 4 after the likes of your break crop, as in oats. So there's definitely in our view, there's definitely be 0.3 to 0.4 of a ton per acre of a benefit there. But that's when everything is going perfect. One of the big advantages in beans is that provided the harvest doesn't run late, they do leave the ground in absolutely ideal condition. A very loose, loamy seedbed. Even this year, we would have direct drilled the wheat in after the beans, because the ground is very pliable. So, there's a major cost saving there as well. But it's to get that crop of wheat in Certainly after ideally 10th of October, and it off with that nitrogen in the seed bed gets off to a very good start.
Okay. And like you said, there are long-term benefits there in terms of the soil health and that. Just as we're on beans, lads, a question just come in there. If it seemed to be a problem on beans in coastal areas, have the panel any view on this problem? Maybe Martin, I can put that one to you.
I assume we're talking about this black bean aphid where you see a big cluster of them on. Usually it's not a problem. Look, you usually see them in big clusters on some of the plants near the headland. So I suppose if they're on less than 5% of the plants, you wouldn't consider spraying for them. And as you walk out into the field, you shouldn't really see them in most years. And
of course, it often coincides in around flowering, and obviously we don't want to apply pesticides at that stage as well. Yeah. I'm kind of bundling a few questions together here on Brexit, Fiona, but you did mention this sort of divergence in regulation, which may be an issue going forward. Maybe you gave the example of maybe gene editing or maybe different plant protection products. Are there any other areas or any comments you'd have on that one?
Yeah, look, that's not an issue, I think, for today or tomorrow. It's more over the medium term when we get used to this whole Brexit process. But the way that the agreement was put in place, it does leave for divergence in regulations between the EU and the UK. So I think issues to do with sanctioning of different crop protection products could be an issue in the future. Now, there is an arbitration process if that has a material effect on trade within the EU, but it's something to watch out for, and these are the big headaches that we're going to have to get used to going forward into the future. So just because we don't have tariffs doesn't mean that Brexit has gone away. I think that the headaches are really only starting. So regulation of crop protection materials, a big issue where it could diverge between the EU and the UK, given possibly farmers in the UK a competitive advantage there. But as I say, arbitration process is written into the agreement, and we'll just have to see how that pans out in the future.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. And Kieran, on the Brexit one as well, a few questions on bringing in machinery parts. Is that going to be similar in terms of the machinery importing?
Yeah, the one thing I'd say on talking to lots of people in the industry and the trade and stuff like that, they're working very hard, but really the game only started on the 1st of January. We knew this was all coming, but obviously no one could play the game or see where the problems were. And what's happening on talking to people is the overnight delivery of a part coming from the UK, there could be a big problem there. So what I'd say a lot of dealers are going to be doing is they're going to be trying to talk to their customers, and they're going to try to have a little bit more stuff in stock. Michael mentioned it there as well, planning, so that the speed is probably going to be a big thing. I think we're going to get this all sorted out. I think we're going to adapt and evolve, but in the medium to short term, I think it'll have an effect that if you walk into your local dealership and they don't have part A, you mightn't be able to get it overnight.
Okay. Thanks, Kieran. I'm just running short on time, and I'm going to apologise to anybody's question I didn't get to, because we do have quite a lot of questions here. But one that maybe for you, Mark Plunkett, again, the question here: will disking in slurry be good enough to incorporate into the soil, or do we really need to plough it in?
Ideally, ploughing in is the best, Kieran. That that you're covering it over, like disking it in. You're not getting full incorporation with the disking. So I would encourage ploughing in as the best way to retain that nitrogen.
Okay, and as you're on there, where can you get nutrient value of slurry tested?
Any of the private labs, Kieran, will do a dry matter and an NPK for you on your slurry.
Okay.
Or your say solid manures like your poultry manures or farmyard manure.
Yeah, one of the things that Michael McCarthy I got from Raymond Maloney's presentation there was he seemed to alter the application rate depending on where the slurry came from, whether it was maybe a sow house or a finisher house.
Yeah, he could. I suppose Raymond was in the fortunate situation that he knows exactly where the slurry is from. But Raymond will tell you, like, the best of pig slurry will come from the fattening house as opposed to the sow house.
Okay.
And he is able to adjust his rates based on that,
Okay.
The other thing there, what I meant to mention earlier, like with Raymond's scenario, like he mentioned, he's using a bag and a half of ASN after, which may seem low to some people, but Raymond will tell you that that's 10 years experience has told them that's what they'll use. And they've often found that, you could come into May and the crop looks a bit hungry because that kind of release of organic nitrogen hasn't come. And they've experienced taught them in the past that's where you stop, because some people put on extra nitrogen in at that stage, and a month later they've an extremely lush crop. That could be a problem. So experience will tell you an awful lot too of what you need, like.
And that's what experience brings, I suppose.
Yeah,
in fairness,
exactly.
Kieran, sorry to cut in there. Just I suppose 2 points. One on the analysis is that there is a slurry hydrometer available that costs about €50 there. Very useful for pig slurry and cattle slurry to determine the dry matter and its nutrient value on farm. It's a low cost way. And I suppose just to make people aware, we're in the 3rd year of a 4-year trial called NutriCycle. I am up on Burke's farm and Martin's farm there in Wicklow, where we're actually looking at the long-term benefits and the soil benefits. We're applying a range of bio-based organic manures in a crop rotation, and we're looking at, as well as the fertilizer replacement benefit, we're also looking at the soil benefit in terms of improving soil carbon, improving soil health, and what that brings. And I say we're in the 3rd year, so that trial will give us a great insight to the soil benefits of putting organic manures on continuous tillage soils.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. I just realised I'm probably gone well over time at this stage, so I'm going to halt the questioning at this stage, or the discussion forum, I should say. But I think it is very reassuring from the comments that we got there, especially on the organic manures and the beans. That when you look at farm to fork and maybe what we're facing into going forward, that we can reduce our chemical fertilizer bills by very efficient use of organic manures. And we see from the likes of what's happening on Tom's farm there, beans are a good option for tillage growers in Ireland, and obviously can help substitute for some of the imported protein sources. So before I wrap up, I just want to draw your attention to, Darry, you might bring up a slide there of a number of events that we have in February. I suppose February is kind of dedicated to a lot of tillage events. So we have on the 3rd of February, the National Tillage Conference. We have on the 9th of February, Crop Walk. The 11th of February, we have a part 2 of that crop walk, and the part 2 of the National Tillage Conference is on February 17th. And then on February 23rd, we've got the Malt and Barley Conference. They're all obviously online, and they're all starting at 11:30. But I suppose just I want to thank everybody who participated today and last Tuesday as well. But I especially want to thank 3 of my colleagues, Martin Burke and Shay Phelan and Michael Hennessy. They put a huge effort into organising this. I suppose no more than farmers. This is a huge change for ourselves. We'd normally be out in the fields and maybe in halls and that around the country. So we're all adapting, I suppose, to the situation that we're in at the moment. So I particularly want to thank the 3 lads, because behind the scenes they put a massive effort into this, doing videos, editing, and all of that. And finally, I want to thank you, the attendees, as well, for giving up of your time this morning to attend the webinar. And I hope that that you got, even if it was on just one thing that you can use on your farm that might be of benefit. So that's all for now, till we meet again. Thank you. Bye.
Very good.